You're listening to a DM podcast.
Welcome to Over the Back Fence. I'm Di Edwards.
I'm Nicola Dale, and we're buddies of nearly 4 decades. And yes, we actually do happen to share a back fence.
We do. We love parties, people, inspirational stories, and honestly, making the most out of life.
So join us as we open our hearts, share our stories, and hear from some of the most inspirational people in the world, and have a laugh along the way.
Yeah.
Enjoy. Hey, Jodie, talk about
There
travel.
we go.
Is that something that you like to do?
It's really funny. Travel to me is like, in the diary, it's like life, travel, life, travel. It's like my escapism, it's my balance, it's my centering, it's everything. It opens your eyes and you switch off from a routine that you normally have in your day-to-day life.
I love hearing that too, because as you know, and as a lot of the listeners know too, that, I flew for Qantas for 34 years and boy, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And a lot of our listeners have also said they want to hear more about travel, more about aviation and the behind the scenes of it all. And so I would tell you what, I think get ready for takeoff, everybody.
Great.
Buckle up, because we have got Captain Greg Fitzgerald in our lounge here over the back fence here, about to take off. And you're not only just a top captain with Qantas for 34 years, you're an aviation professor with a love of boats, planes, trains, and everything else that comes with travel. So welcome aboard.
Welcome, Greg.
Greg.
Welcome.
Thanks, girls. Great to be here.
Yeah, like that's a remarkable amount of years up in the bloody skies. Like, seriously.
Yeah, 35 years with Qantas is a long time.
Yeah. Incredible, like how it's changed aviation.
And it's just not just like we love all the Qantas pilots, but you are quite an exceptional pilot, really. Because tell us a little bit about...
What makes you exceptional, Greg?
Come on. I know I'm, like tooting your horn a little bit here, but really...
I'm not so sure that I'm exceptional.
I think I'm allowed to brag, because I flew for the airlines. Your name's pretty...
Hey, quickly, did you guys ever fly together?
We think we did, yes.
Oh,
we're pretty sure.
We remember a face and a smile, and we both
that's what I
started
thought.
in 1986. How's that? Back in the good
back
old
to
days.
exceptional.
I think exceptional isn't the right word. I had a varied career other than just fly the line. I was fortuitous enough to get into management and into training. Yeah. And over the years, I became the manager of pilot recruitment, which I found really funny because a couple of years before I got into Qantas, I was knocked back by Qantas. And that's how I ended up flying in New Guinea. And 5 years later, or maybe a little bit more, I was actually running pilot recruitment. Anyway, so pilot recruitment, I ran all their cadets.
Can we cut in there? What does it take to recruit a pilot? As in mentally?
Yeah, look, Qantas led the world in behavioural interviewing and doing a different sort of psych test. And they sat there, the peer captains that people thought were really good down in the mid-1990s, and they pulled them apart and came up with new psychological tests based on these people who they thought were really good. And we use those.
Give me an example. Give us
well,
the goss.
Give us...
they came...
Because let's be honest, if
with,
I'm in a fuselage and there's turbulence, I want to hear calmness from the pilot.
Well, and that's one of them.
He's in a good headspace.
Okay, he spoke well, we're fine.
They came up with 9 core competencies that made a really good captain. And when you recruit a new pilot, you're not looking for them just to be a co-pilot or a
nice
flight
person.
engineer. You want them to be an A380 captain eventually.
Wow.
So some of the competencies were decision-making, team building, communication, and it goes on. But they built a test around it, and we tested for them. On top of that, we also tested in the simulator a number of interviews, medicals, and criminal history checks. It's a very long process, and it's still a very long process.
Yeah. I would imagine.
What
about the hosties? Do they do that with the hosties? The hosties with the mosties?
I tell you what, back in the day, how Greg and I can sort of, tell many a story, but also back in the day, it used to be you had to go on the scales, you had to be,
Oh my God!
And so all those things, how things are out the window, but you had to be a certain look. If you didn't have that lipstick on, and I think I've still got my lipstick sort of like actually here it is. What is it?
Touch up before she touches down.
Those little hostie that hasn't left me. But can I just also say, we've got so much to say, but you know what I love hearing, and I'm sorry you didn't get into Qantas the first time round, but I just think that's just a great example for every listener here everyone gets a knockback, and sometimes you get a knockback in life. You go, that's it, I can't do it.
It's so
you
true.
obviously had that inner drive, to go, right, I'll try it again. Or how did that work
that
for
how
you?
it came about?
I love hearing that.
Well, can I also just quickly pick you girls up on you're not politically correct?
Ooh.
Oh, using the word hosty. You can't do that anymore.
No, wait on.
And that's one of the-
It was hosty with the mosty.
Hey, what about trolley jolly?
No, female flight attendant now. And can I say 30?
That's
Well,
right.
it's now 38 years since I actually joined.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
that political correctness was fun.
Yeah,
It
well
was.
said.
And it's
the
just.
things we
It's
used
called
to
relax.
do.
It's relaxed.
And
Have a bit
laughter.
of fun. Have a
Laughter,
bit of.
laughter,
Sometimes it's
laughter.
gone, the pendulum swung sometimes
It's
too far the other way,
sometimes
hasn't it?
too far. I agree
But
with
from a
that,
knockback,
yeah,
you've just said,
yeah.
right, and it looks like
Yeah,
it
well,
hasn't
look,
stopped.
do you know, being knocked back from Qantas, I had very little experience. That actually got me the job in New Guinea. And the greatest flying I ever did in my whole career, bar some of the jumbo flying I did, was having my time in New Guinea. So,
wonderful.
the gods work in funny ways some ways.
They're the gifts
If
of
I'd got
life,
into
aren't
Qantas
they?
the first time, I would never have got the opportunity to fly for a regional airline in New Guinea.
We all think it's the worst day of their lives, and yet that the universe is saying, we're going to send you sideways, it's going to be better.
Yeah.
And it was
Bingo.
better.
Yeah. Also, no, 747, Greg and I both flew in what we call it the Queen of the Skies.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us
Forever.
some of the, what's it like flying the 747? Is that your favourite aircraft?
Without
or-
a doubt.
Tell us
Without a
yeah.
doubt. Look,
Why is that?
of my 35 years, I had 22 years on the 747 and the rest of the time was on the 767. People think the bigger the aircraft, the harder it must be to fly. It's actually not true. It's the queen of the skies because it's a pilot's aircraft. It's a docile dot giant. It's a beautiful pilot's aircraft. It's big, it's cumbersome, but you point it in towards the ground or the runway and it goes there. I mean, all my years on the 767, which was a challenging pilot's aircraft, you had to fly it all the way to the ground. But the engineering in the jumbo was just beautiful.
Can we ask you some questions? I want to know your worst flying experience in all those years of being in the air.
Ooh,
as
you're
a
going to give
pilot.
this away.
Try and give us your worst flying experience.
Believe it or not, probably it wasn't the worst in the way you're thinking of the word worst, but it was on the ground. And I just landed in Coolangatta because the 767 was doing both domestic and international flying at that time. And we pulled into the gate, and without any indications on the flight deck at all, the tower said one of our engines was on fire.
Whoa.
I'm glad they told you.
Well, immediately after that, we did get a fire warning, and we put the fire bottle and everything into the engine. The fire didn't go out. That was the problem. So,
And you had a full flight, like with passengers?
we had full flight. We were about to
that's
disembark.
frightening.
But the engines hadn't been shut down. Anyway, look, it's the only time in my career we've prepared the cabin to be evacuated.
Wow.
And
Not with slides.
yes, we were.
Oh,
We were
wow.
about to.
Always want to go right down one of those.
So you,
Not on the
Well, it's
Hudson.
not Luna Park, you know.
No.
I didn't let those go on the Hudson.
And
It's on
in
the
our
wing.
training and our safety training is so important, as cabin crew, it's so important. But for pilots and technical, it's that next level. And you were tested how often?
Can I just say,
Yeah.
from that incident,
Yes,
when we
please.
stood to the cabin crew to alert, ready to open the doors, it was not long after a British Airways 737 had a similar incident in Manchester, and unfortunately a cabin crew member panicked down the back and opened a door into the fire, which led to the fire coming into the cabin and killing a lot of
I don't
people.
remember
Our
this.
cabin crew this
Yes.
day were superb.
Wow.
Now, we didn't have to evacuate the aircraft. They didn't panic.
Wow.
They'd assessed the fire, and as it turned out, the fire
What
went
was
out.
your worst flying issue? Most frightening flying in the air issue? Come on, give us the goss.
Well, there'd been hurricanes up around Hong Kong, and Hong Kong had been closed for days. No airplanes had gone. And I was actually a first officer on the 747. I wasn't the captain. And we got to the airport, and operations control said, you're going. We said, why? Hong Kong's closed. They said, commercial reasons. They think it might open, the wind might abate, and we had so much fuel on board to go back to Manila if it happened. Long story short, we held in horrendous conditions. We ran around and round in circles
Well, those sick bags would have been
Oh,
out.
yeah,
at
they
that
were
stage
out.
there, that's
Yeah.
for sure.
And
No tea or coffee or
eventually,
champagne.
Cathay Pacific made an approach. No one was getting in. They made an approach down the harbour, and they got in. So we made an approach, and as we broke out of the driving rain and wind, the crosswind was so horrendous. When I looked forward to tell the captain, because he's flying on instruments, I couldn't see the runway. That's because we were turned into the wind so much. It was 90 degrees out to my right.
Whoa.
And
Those were the days with all the high rise either side of the runway.
Yeah, that was coming in the other way. We were going straight down the harbour.
Yeah.
So
Amazing.
And then the wind just came off in the last 500 feet, and we landed. And Cathay and ourselves were the only two people or aircraft to get in for 2 days.
Qantas strikes again.
Tell you what,
So when you say frightening, it wasn't frightening. But
Frightening
it was
for me.
probably one of the hardest I've ever had to work.
Wow.
And I love those questions because it's so true. People want to know that, and there's a lot of people that fear. And I think it's something we say, Greg and myself, when we've been trained so well with Qantas, we just naturally diffuse the thing because we know how safe it can be. And I was just talking recently about the Japan Airlines flight and how well they did as cabin crew and pilots. The one there where, they did a full evacuation and they got, everyone out and no one was injured in that short period of time. But they guarded the doors and did all that. So it sort of stopped people from having that fear of flying, which so many people do.
It's
but I tell you
remarkable.
what, you are in safe hands.
But I've always imagined, Nicola was interviewed on the Today Show about this, and I wanted to ask a question, but I
Spokesperson,
couldn't.
yes,
But I
yeah.
wanted, now I'm going to interview Nicola. I'm just digressing
I
a little bit.
love this.
My
yes.
question to you is,
Okay.
I've always
Yeah.
wondered, and I'm sure a lot of people have,
Yes.
excuse me, I'm going to swear, but I can because it's a podcast. Like, I always thought if an emergency happened, it'd be, hosties would be, every man for him fucking self, I'm out of here. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, see you later, bye. Like, I'm number one, meow. Where, as you were talking about the Japan Airlines flight, like, oh my God, it was structured, it was organised. It was remarkable to hear that. But do you understand what I'm saying?
I
Like,
do, and
To
that-
me, it was always each man for himself.
And that's why
I'm
I
outta
think it's a
here.
good point to sort of bring up, Di. Thank you for bringing that up. And I think for everyone listening too is that cabin crew and pilots, we are safety professionals. So even though you had the term of sort of like, with a trolley dolly and you're there to serve food and whatever, we are there. Absolutely, our number one aim is for safety, and to get off safely. So yes, you want to have fun along the way, and I've popped more champagne bottles than I think than most people.
But you got kids at home,
yes.
and you're going, let them off first.
Yeah, but I think it's the
remarkable.
Thing, I guess you're trained so well that you've got, say, even 90 seconds to do something that you do automatically. Of course, you have to look after yourself so you can look after everybody else. What do they say? Put the oxygen mask on first.
Yeah.
So as crew, we
It's
do
true.
put the oxygen mask. We look after ourselves
Yes.
to look after everybody
Everyone
else.
And Nicola is
you-
absolutely right. People used to say, how did you handle the responsibility of looking after 350
Absolutely.
passengers?
Good.
Absolutely.
Well, the short answer is, if I look after my own ass, I've looked after their ass.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
if
yeah.
I keep
and
myself
I think you can
safe,
apply that to
Yes.
life, can't you?
Yeah.
It's a great, everything we
for
try and do
life.
is
Yeah.
with the life there.
So,
That's
It's a great one.
I love hearing
and
that.
why people get frightened is the lack of control and the lack of knowledge.
Correct.
So whilst the pilot might be working very hard in an emergency situation, even if you can get a 5 or 10 second PA out to the passengers saying, hey, I'm still alive, we're okay.
Yeah, a bit of a giggle,
Everyone,
yeah.
everybody
Diffuses
relaxes
it.
a bit, but they've got no control, and people don't like the loss of control. And that's where a lot of fear of flying comes from.
Like I used to stare at the
Yes,
hosties.
yes,
I
yeah.
used to. I don't so much now, and go, what's their oh, they look a bit frightened. Oh, I must be more frightened then. You know what I mean? Like a crazy thing.
How did you love the lifestyle of being an international Qantas captain, flying, all around the world for 5 years? Did you
Oh,
love
I
it?
was blessed. I mean, I equate it to Greg Norman playing golf and being paid for it. I went and did my hobby for 35 years and they paid me for it. When we started, I said it was life, travel, life. Well, we were travel, come home, little bit of life, travel. So
Oh, fabulous.
it's hard on the family.
that's my
we
next
accept
question.
that.
Yeah.
And of course, the washing machine and the dishwasher will all break down the moment you take off and you're on your way to Los Angeles or something.
You're in Tahiti,
That's
I'm
life.
drinking a cocktail.
The kid, your wife will ring and say the kids are all sick, as Nicola said.
Yes.
You're sipping a cocktail in Tahiti.
Absolutely, I'm going to kill him. And relationship-wise, yours.
Yeah, I've just had my 40-year wedding
So
anniversary
what a
in December.
remarkable wife.
Yeah.
Like to put, like with Nicola and me, all my years of knowing. Hi, bye, hi, bye, hi. When are you back? When are you back? When are you back? Because it's all. I mean, she's like, how many children do you have?
I've got 3 daughters.
See, that's a lot to manage.
They're all
when you're
married,
away.
and they're all
She's
spread
incredible.
around Australia.
What's her name?
Donna.
I want to give her a shout out.
Wow.
Donna.
Hey,
'Cause
Donna,
it wouldn't be easy.
we love you, and
Yeah.
but I'm sure Donna enjoyed a lot of the good holidays, and the kids did too.
Very
because
good
my
point.
children are I
Yeah.
think were blessed as well, from
Yes.
young kids going to Africa on trips and things like that.
Yeah.
I think like a job.
Well,
you made it work for you.
It's interesting. Just this last weekend, I was commentating on an Antarctic flight, and we
Wow.
went down to Mount Erebus and McMurdo, and I was fortunate enough to have 2 of my daughters and their husbands with me. And my 3rd daughter actually came with me on another flight on New Year's Eve.
Wow.
But the eldest daughter, years ago, and she was just little, only maybe 3 or 4, we got onto a jumbo to go on holidays, and we came in the front door and we turned left to business class, which we've been fortunate enough
Love
to get.
that manoeuvre.
And
So
at the
it's
top
turn
of her
left.
voice, my daughter said, "Hey, Dad, who does sit down the back of these aeroplanes?" as kids have no filters. And I said, "If you don't be quiet, you in a minute."
I remember getting on a plane once and I turned left and he went, no, Mrs. Edwards, you're the other way. I was so embarrassed. Doing the walk of shame, going back,
And isn't it funny too how times have changed? You know, like you used to be on the aircraft back in the day, and if you did turn left, you'd have to have a suit and tie.
Oh,
It
yeah.
was very much.
And
a
if
sort
you
of
and to
big-
be upgraded, you had to. They wouldn't upgrade you unless you look good.
tie.
And now I've left Qantas, I'm just happy to get on.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
love that.
And tell
Of
us about
course.
your flight deck
Yeah.
days when people could actually go and visit the captain and see the
Yes,
captain.
the fun days.
Who did you see? Who did you have some sort of like key visitors or prominent people
Come up to the
that?
cockpit.
2 that stand out. We had Patrick Stewart once.
Yes.
Now, Patrick Stewart was the captain of the USS Enterprise in Star Trek, the 2nd series. Now, he came up and he's sitting there for quite some hours and he's going, "Oh, wow, look at all these instruments." And I'm sitting there thinking, my goodness, I've got the captain of the starship USS Enterprise sitting here.
Telling you that.
Saying, wow.
Oh, that's cool.
And the other guy that springs to mind is Gordon Scully Power. Now, Scully Power was actually the first Australian astronaut, but he had to change nationalities to go to space. He had to become an American citizen. And whilst officially Andy Thomas was the first Australian, Scully Power ultimately went to space as a mission specialist, and he actually was head of the astronaut program, and so I was fascinated by talking to him of
Meantime,
how
the
they
plane's gone.
how they
Well,
selected.
Oh, I've got to bring her back. Sorry, I got so carried away.
Well, it's the only time. It was a daylight flight back from Los Angeles, and we have a heavy crew, so we have relief pilots. And it's the only time in my life no one would go on their break. They just sat there. He was so fascinating, talking about going up
You're
in
such
the
a
space
techie.
shuttle.
Me and Nicola were thinking you're going to say Beyonce.
You're right.
You know what I
am a
mean?
techie.
You get my point.
But that's what's been married for 40 years.
Very true. Well said.
Remember some of the terminologies, there with sort of like airline crew, I think sort of globally is, we all know what BOB is, don't we? Bob, best on board.
Best on
And
board.
sometimes you used to
Do
get like
you know
a
that?
little message
Or is
going.
it just a Nicola one?
In it, best on
No, I've
board.
never heard that before.
I knew it.
That's the
I
answer.
knew it.
That's the answer. That's why he's
See?
been married
That's
for
the
40
hostie with the
years.
mosties
That's true.
line.
Because normally it used to be sort of like, can you bring, who's the sort of one sitting
Tea
in
and coffee,
25A?
BOB.
Can she have an invitation to the flight deck, please?
So good. Best on board.
Yeah, well, and what about some of your favourite destinations when you were flying with Qantas?
Yeah, 60 countries you've been to. That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and some of them were outside of flying with Qantas.
Yeah,
because
of course.
I take
That's
people
what I call
overseas on
travelling.
trips.
Yes.
trips now for a company called Captain's Choice. But without a doubt, I mean, if I'm going to select something other than Sydney, because I think Sydney's just the greatest city in the world.
Yeah. We're the same.
We agree.
Yeah, just
got a lot of international
Just to keep my
Wales,
friends in
Sydney,
Melbourne
yes.
and Brisbane happy. Yeah, you're pretty good too. Without a doubt, there's two. I mean, I love New York.
Yeah.
Absolutely love New York.
New York. You're going to break into a song,
Oh,
Di?
in a minute.
Yeah, that's
Well-
right.
These little town blues.
Normally you don't have a podcast if Di doesn't
I'll
get
head and away. If I can make it there,
It's
I'll
Beyonce.
make it anywhere. It's up to you. New York, New York. Sorry about that.
And
love
look,
that
I love
too.
New
Sorry,
York in
I
the winter.
agree.
Most people
Yeah.
don't like it in the winter.
Wish we had like little
So it was really
layovers.
easy to get to
Yeah.
because no one else
Yeah.
wanted to go there in the winter.
Yeah.
But my wife's been in and around theatre working all her life. So you go to London and New York, you've got the West End and Broadway on your doorstep, and they've paid you to get there. All you've got to do is go and buy a ticket. You know, let alone the nightlife and the bars. It's really, as that song says, it's just the city that never sleeps. That's why I
Nicola
love it.
actually went to New York just after the
After
World Trade
9/11,
Center.
yeah,
after the World
9/11.
Trade
I don't know
Centers.
whether
Yeah.
you were one of the first pilots to fly there at that time, but I remember as crew, when the whole world shut down, and then we flew into New York, and it was just post that. It was only a couple of weeks, and it was still all the burning smell. It was unbelievable
incredible.
and very sad.
Yeah.
What happened with New
week
York
later,
at that
wasn't it?
time.
A week later?
It was
something
as soon as the
crazy.
flights could basically
Yeah,
open
it was
up.
very
really,
shortly.
my next trip was
Yeah.
to New York.
And didn't you have tickets to Broadway or
You know,
something?
yeah, a lot of things were shut.
Yeah.
But
that will
It-
stay with you forever.
It's
that
one of
is.
those
Yeah.
events in life you remember where you were. I wasn't on the
Yeah.
jumbo,
No.
but I remember where I was.
were you?
Where were you?
I was in Brisbane, about to take a flight to Singapore, and I woke up and put the television on as you're getting ready and saw it all happening live. So it was actually quite surreal. We went to the airport, and half the cabin crew didn't want to go.
That's
As
my
half
question to you.
Half the passengers
How did
didn't
it
want to.
affect you
No.
personally
Well,
as a pilot?
Well, it didn't, because I was concentrating on just getting the aeroplane to Singapore, and there was no threat in Australia. We went and did our job. But, that particular day, I spoke to all the cabin crew before we boarded. A lot of the passengers didn't want to board the aircraft, and rightly so, probably. I went out into the Qantas club and into the terminal, and basically spoke to the Qantas manager too, that if people didn't want to get on, Qantas had made a decision there'd be no penalty. They'd fly at another time. But, everybody got on. I
And
think
you were
bar
fine?
one person.
You were okay? I mean,
But
that
you've
didn't.
got Captain Greg died.
it's
too,
true.
And you are reassuring.
Greg-
but I think, I was saying
Captain
exceptional. but I
capable
would say
Greg.
most captains, and they're so calm and trained,
Yes,
and you do take your job seriously, and it's and I just
I
think
mean, the
it's
whole world's
reassurance
going,
for
I'm never going to
people.
fly again. He's about to take off.
But
and
you,
I'm
you
like,
do with your
fine.
job. I'm not
Yeah.
saying it doesn't affect
No.
you, but
Yes.
it'll affect you later. I'll tell you a quick story
That's
about
professional.
being
Yes.
affected. I mean, I was involved in the first Bali bombing evacuation, so I was the first aircraft
wow.
in after the RAAF. I got involved about 5:30 that morning, and actually took off late in the afternoon, and two RAAF Hercules had been in before us and taken the worst of the burn victims out, but there was still a lot of people. And I had an empty aeroplane. I'd taken all the Qantas medical staff, and we'd taken all the care flight people, doctors and nurses and trauma teams. I refused to take the media. Sorry, media. When we got there, it was horrendous. I had the head doctor, guy from Qantas, Ian Morrison, with me, and we went into the terminal.
Trained me in training school
the
in
ter-
1986.
The
yes.
terminal was chaos. There were about 1,200 people in the terminal, and they'd cordoned off this area for stretchers in front of the Qantas office. And basically we had to go around to, ultimately the decision was mine whether someone would fly. And time again, Ian was saying, this person can't fly, they're too bad. But if they don't fly, they'll die here. So the decision was actually made that we can't go to Darwin because their burns unit was full. We couldn't go to Perth, their burns unit were full with the two Air Force. So we came all the way back to Australia. And
to
no one
Sydney?
died on the aircraft.
No one
Go, Greg.
The triage people. But we've just had the 20th anniversary of that. And
yes.
it does affect you. It was.
Capable Greg.
Yes, yeah.
Did you do somewhere? Was it Iran? Did I read somewhere, or Iraq, or somewhere? Did you do another?
Done a few evacuations. One was the SAS out of the Middle East during the first Iraqi war.
Right.
It was a funny story because it was a covert RAAF operation. And so the cabin crew weren't to be told where we were going. Only management captains were involved.
How amazing is that?
The Qantas was painted out on the aircraft, and officially we were going as an RAAF flight. Well, the day before, Qantas found out that the RAAF hadn't got the overflight clearances that we needed to get into the Middle East. So quickly overnight, all the paint that was put on over Qantas and the tail was taken off. Qantas
no more flying kangaroo.
Well, we actually then operated into Dubai as probably one of the very first Qantas flights ever to land in Dubai, and it was quite open then that Qantas was in the Middle East, and we picked up the SAS. And the other one I did was just at the beginning of COVID, which was probably one of my proudest moments, was I actually went into Wuhan.
That is amazing.
Wow, that's huge.
So what are we talking?
That's a biggie.
February or March?
February
2020.
Yeah. So the week before we'd done one other evacuation flight, repatriation flight of Australian citizens.
Yes.
And I was actually doing an Antarctic charter that weekend, and I took the one only 6 days later. And
at that stage, no one really knew what was going on.
No, that's right.
No. Tell us about that flight to Wuhan.
Well, the crew all were positioned up to Hong Kong because it would have been too long to go from Australia to Wuhan and back. And then the aeroplane came up empty from Australia with only the people on board with DFAT, doctors, nurses, etc. All of them had been on the flight 5 days earlier. It landed in Hong Kong. And whilst they're still on their way, operations in Sydney and myself are dealing with a situation where the Chinese government refused to give us a diplomatic clearance to enter China. Not air traffic control clearance, I'm talking diplomatic clearance. Oh. Long story short, we did not get the diplomatic clearance to go into Wuhan. By this time, the airplane had landed in Hong Kong. And because all of those people on board, and there were 40 people on board, had been to Wuhan, even though they had never got off the aeroplane the week before, Hong Kong wouldn't let them land.
Oh boy, it was crazy times, wasn't it?
Flying around.
So they're on the ground.
So
there were two decisions. Well, we can't leave them on the aeroplane for 24 hours.
Absolutely.
They'd already flown 9 or 10 hours to get to Hong Kong. Yeah. So we'll have to fly them back to Australia rather than go to Wuhan. To their credit, every one of them said, no, we'll sit on the aeroplane for 24 hours.
You're kidding.
Really?
And they did. The engineer went out. We had a travelling engineer.
Hide that from the media. I can't remember hearing that.
Well,
that was
Greg
amazing.
wouldn't take the media,
exactly.
remember?
That's right. And there was no little whispers in the ear.
They were
I
made
used
as
to like
comfortable as possible, with food
I never
and
heard
water.
that story.
Now, the Hong
That's
Kong authorities
remarkable.
the next morning, they did relent a little bit, and they allowed them into the Qantas club to have showers.
I thought you said champagne.
Anyway,
they're going to be the chairman's having some
So
bubbles.
I take my hat off to them.
Right.
They were going to get this job
Wow.
done. We then did depart the following night to Wuhan, and it was eerie when we landed.
Wow.
Think of New York or London Heathrow, an enormous airport. This is a huge place, Wuhan.
I didn't even know that.
If you go into the terminal of this huge airport and there's not an aircraft there, it's just a ghost town.
Yeah.
There were one or two other of
And
probably
Greg,
100 gates.
Yeah, wow.
Incredible.
Why I say it was probably I was really happy or proud about this. Of the 250 people we took out, 153 were unaccompanied Australian children.
Oh,
really?
really?
So we got
So
all
it was
these
like a
kids.
rescue flight.
It
that's
really was a
amazing.
rescue
Go
flight.
So
Wow.
that would make you feel proud, and that's where Qantas did a lot of those,
Sterling
ones
job.
with it's like these rescue flights. When a disaster happens around the world, they're wonderful at doing that. And for you being the captain is a huge thing. So I remember it with the whole thing. That's when I suppose the world and flying changed. But being on an aircraft that had just come from Wuhan, and even the cabin crew were scared to going on,
Touching
it's
things.
going through the air conditioning
It's paranoia.
system. There's all this sort of stuff there.
Yeah.
Remember the fear at that time.
Yeah.
Well, can I say it was the safest flight I've ever been on. The
Right,
whole
it was sanitised
the
within
whole
each
upper
of its
deck was
lines.
a sterile, safe area for crew.
Yeah.
The forward cabin of business class was a sterile, safe area for all the DFAT doctors, nurses travelling with us. Premium economy was a buffer area for putting hazmat suits on. And then all our passengers were actually in economy. Now, the cabin crew, as Nicola said, are there 100% for safety. So when the people got on, they were all in hazmat suits and they attended the doors.
Passengers. How could you drink your champagne, though?
Well, they didn't get it. They did not get it. So
chicken or beef, I'm afraid you're wearing a hazmat
They had
suit.
pre.
Can you imagine sitting in one like?
Yes,
that is pretty incredible.
I remember seeing
Love a photo of
you
that.
would see cabin crew sometimes going through international airports and a lot of American ones, and they'd come off the aircraft. You wouldn't be recognised in your uniforms. You would have.
It was a crazy time in the world. On another sad note, but a beautiful note, was Greg flew the 747 over to heading the last 747 going out to the Mojave Desert.
I still call Australia home.
Nicola was actually at the Opera House that day.
It's such an emotional thing. I can't even imagine for yourself, Greg, but as for cabin crew and flying for so long, we all loved, and I flew on the Queen of the Skies, and I was there at the Opera House when it was doing its final flight, and we all got dressed up in the Poochies and the YSL and all the uniforms there, and we looked up, and you were the captain. Tell us what it was like.
Look, it was an honour to be asked to start with, to be part of the team to take it. It was a team, it wasn't just me, but a lot of work went into it. I don't think people realise just how much work, and I will mention the fleet captain by name, Owen Weaver. It was his idea.
He's
and
a
he was
great
the one
guy,
who
Owen.
he was the guy who convinced Alan Joyce that you just can't let the last jumbo go without some sort of ceremony,
Fabulous.
COVID or not.
Hot spa in the Andes with Owen.
Did you tip the wings?
Yeah, so you've got to remember all the jumbo pilots and most of the pilots in Qantas were stood down, and they've been stood down for months and months. So we weren't current. So there's a huge number of simulators we had to go back in and get retrained. I actually, into the Mojave Desert, had been asked to be the first officer, so I was in an operational front seat. But my right-hand seat endorsement had lapsed, so I had to get re-endorsed. The actual captain operating when the final touchdown was a guy called Ewan Cameron. Yes. And Ewan had operated the jumbo for 40 straight years. We believe Ewan was the longest operating jumbo person in the world. So all these things happen.
All the red tape.
And then
how many people listening have been on a 747? Come on.
And the flying
most people.
And is this correct?
It's very emotional to me.
That they did actually
I
sort of like in the shape, the flight charter went like a shape like the tail of a
like the kangaroo.
Kangaroo.
So
isn't it incredible?
We had to go and practice
I'm
that.
going to get some photos and put them
tape.
on
Yeah,
during
good
that
idea.
week there and some of the uniform.
Well, the other
photos
thing
back
about that day is, we'd had to go and practice it all in the simulator, that it wouldn't have been a good look had we had an incident that day.
Yeah.
But we were in the air for nearly 2 hours, probably nearly closer to 3, and then we pointed the aeroplane towards Los Angeles and started a 13 to 14 hour flight. So we were really heavy, which is unusual for a display flight. So we took off. We flew down the harbour at low level. Yeah. We're at nearly 400 tonnes. Now, normally you would be doing these sort of display flights at about 260 or 70.
Oh, you had the
80.
fuel on board.
We had so much fuel on board.
It.
So that is a problem in itself which needed to be managed. We flew low level down the coast to the Historical Aircraft Restoration Society down in Wollongong, where the very first jumbo 747-400 is parked, and we flew low level over there and tipped our wings. So basically it was the last jumbo saluting the first jumbo.
Just jumping ahead.
Yeah.
How emotional were you when you landed in the desert and said goodbye to the last
again,
I mean, I get emotional. Isn't that weird?
We were all in tears.
Maybe because someone that I love and adore, that was her office in the sky for so long.
Yeah, well, it was emotional.
Yeah.
The whole thing was emotional. We did go up and draw the kangaroo.
Yes.
And as I said to Owen, if it looks like a wombat, I had nothing to do with it. If it looks like the kangaroo, I'll say I was involved. But we landed in LA and then took the aeroplane to the Mojave Desert.
What was it like in the Mojave Desert? Must
be eerie.
It's eerie. It's eerie to take
there.
aeroplanes. 1,000. Easily.
Wow.
I had been to one of the other graveyards a few years earlier, which is Victorville, which is just another airport in the Mojave Desert, and I took another 747 in there, but there was no palaver about that. That was just a standard thing. But
We love palaver.
Yeah, we love a bit of fun. And we love so many people love different travel or whatever, and you're certainly an expert. Now, tell us a little bit about these Antarctica charters. Would the average person love that, or what's it like?
Oh, it's amazing. I've studied Antarctic history for 20 years.
I'm
Ultimately,
obsessed by Shackleton.
Yeah.
Obsessed by him.
I could sit here and talk to you
you
about
have no
Shackleton
idea.
all day.
Yeah, there you
And
go.
for anyone
tell you,
else that doesn't know who that is,
I was commentating all day
Wow.
Sunday down over, and I talked a lot about Shackleton and Scott. But I tell the
against
all
odds.
I tell the backstories, the stories
Yeah.
people haven't heard
No, I love
after
it.
reading all the
So
diaries.
what a
and
dream, though, to have all
Yeah.
that knowledge and then go and work.
Yeah, so
in
look,
there and flying
I
over the
became the
Antarctic.
manager of the Antarctic operations for 6 years for Qantas and Antarctic Flights. They've been doing it for 29 years. When we start up in November this year, there'll be our 30th year going there. And when I left Qantas during COVID, the CEO of Antarctic Flights / Captain's Choice rang me and said, "We'd like you to become a commentator." And I said to him, "Well, I've listened to your commentators and they are the most knowledgeable people I've ever come across. You know, they've all worked and lived in Antarctica, or they're glaciologists, they're volcanologists. I know a lot about the history and I love the history, but my level of knowledge isn't what theirs is." And he said, "That's exactly why I'm asking you."
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, your
Wow.
expertise.
And
something
anyway,
different.
I fooled them. Before we started, Di said she could talk underwater, but apparently I can talk underwater
just-
too, and I've fooled them ever since.
But for the listeners, it's an interesting experience. I've done one of the ones as cabin crew, and it's funny with your family. I took my mum with me, and it was amazing because you actually go for like the day, or you can go for a New Year's Eve
Sounds
experience.
great.
It's a day there, and then you fly over, and then you're commentating what you see below. which
Yeah,
is
and I can
pretty
tell you,
much
last Sunday,
just more than just ice.
It was fantastic. It was crystal clear
What
down
do you
around.
see?
Under.
Like, what are some of the joys
Well, a
that
lot
you
of
can
white
see? Yeah,
and a lot of
apart
blue.
from
You think that, but I mean, the size of the icebergs down there,
I wanna do
the
it.
ice tongues.
You know what I love about Greg is that he retires from flying with Qantas after all those years.
Yep.
And now, like so many people, either retire and they get sadly old and sometimes sick because they sit there and say, "I'm retired." You, with your passion, you went on planes and trains and ships.
He's just getting
and
into
you're
full
now
throttle. He's-
like
woo!
a tour guide and you.
Tell us about the trains too. Have you got a connection there? Toot,
Well,
toot,
the
you know?
train. Well,
I think people probably thought we're joking.
well,
I
the
know,
old.
trains,
Well,
planes,
this is
and
with.
love are moving on that
There,
day.
I was just
Yeah,
thinking
exactly.
I've got to give
Put
another
that
plug.
out.
So this is
Yeah.
with Vintage Rail Journeys, and it's the old Southern Aurora.
We have a
that's the old
champagne
Southern
on board.
Aurora. That's really emotional.
So in the
My grandma went on the Southern
1960s
Aurora.
and 70s, of course, the first class way to go to Melbourne
I was gonna
was
say-
the overnight sleeper on the Southern Aurora.
I've got photos of my grandma from Melbourne to
Yeah.
Sydney on the
The-
Southern
the-
Aurora.
the-
As a
So-
little girl meeting her.
It's been
got
it was
dressed
bought
up
by a
and-
private couple, and it's been restored back to the original condition of the 1960s, of 69 when it
Oh,
started.
how cool
So you're doing
is
day
that?
trips? Or you're
No,
doing
they're
overnight?
5-day trips.
Oh,
4
5-day
nights.
trips.
Wow.
And there's
Oh, that sounds
Do you know
like
what I want
fun.
to do? That, and I want to get.
What do you want to
I
do?
want to pack in that suitcase there all outfits from the 60s to wear.
Oh, we
Well,
could
how
do
did I
cool.
get
We
involved
should have a
in this?
party on it.
Exactly. Let's
No,
do
let's
it.
do
Let's do
it.
an over the back fence party.
Now
I think
you're talking.
We got our Greg.
Well,
Can you
here.
organise that,
I
Greg?
think so.
Thank you very much. Our capable tour
And we'll see if we can
guides.
even book it out with some of our over the back fence listeners, you know. And what about any travel tips? I mean, not just from a captain's point of view. If you're a punter on board, what are sort of Greg's travel tips for people
Don't drink too
now?
much or the pilot will come down and see you leaving.
Do you take sleeping pills? Probably not. I don't know. Do you drink champagne or do you have your water? Or
Number
what's
one tip on long haul travel is people get off and they say they're jet lagged. 90% of jet lag, I believe, is dehydration.
There you go.
So
Because they were sweating on board or
no,
alcohol?
because they're not
Drinking
they're not
vodka.
drinking enough water.
I mean,
So
that's sweating.
if you look
That's
closely,
Good tip
within
for everyone.
hands reach of all the cabin crew and all the pilots is a bottle of water
True.
nearly all the time.
Yeah.
So I say to people, by all means, have a few drinks and maybe a few coffees, but
That's a
don't go
great tip.
overboard.
It
But
really
drink
is.
a lot of water,
Yes.
and it's amazing how much better you feel. And it's funny, we mentioned earlier, I mean, when after 9/11 we weren't allowed passengers on the flight deck anymore. And it's one of the things I miss the most is
Both ends
the
of
interaction with
aircraft.
people. And look, basically, people are lovely. Occasionally you get a narc, but
a narc.
And whilst it was still possible for a pilot to go back into the cabin, it became quite difficult. So jump forward, people ask me, why do you do what I'm doing now? And it actually sounds like I'm doing more than I really am, because I can pick and choose now.
But how lovely.
But the main reason is the interaction with people.
There you go.
And most people on holidays are just lovely, lovely people, and they've all got a story to tell.
You know what? And I think for our,
Greg,
again, I think for our listeners too, it's just a great thing for travel, whether you travel interstate, whether you travel then really, like by train or boat or plane. Sometimes just a change of environment is great. And I tell you what, some of your stories has been incredible. But we've got a couple of our signature questions.
We
do.
We do.
Shoot, Donna?
Oh, okay. Greg.
Gregaroonie.
We're
becoming very...
I hope
you noticed it was Captain Greg when I arrived. Now it's Gregaroonie.
Now it's Gregaroonie.
I tell you what it used to be.
What were you, a hostie with the mostie?
No, it used to be. It wasn't Captain back when I
Why do
started.
that
It was
with
God.
and Sam's our producer. I call her Sammy the Seal. Right, so the question is, if you had an opportunity of meeting anybody in the world over the back fence, who would that be and why?
All right. It is going to be someone associated with Antarctica.
Oh, goody.
But it's not Shackleton.
No,
and
but
it's
who is
someone
it?
that you're probably not going to expect. It's Sir Hubert Wilkins.
Okay, pass. Fill me in.
Sir Hubert, in my mind, is Australia's greatest explorer, and he's right up there, right alongside Douglas Mawson. And yet virtually no Australians have ever heard of him.
What advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
It'd be what I actually started to practice later in life, which is never be afraid to have a go. It's better to have tried and failed than not to have tried it at all. So I never say no to anything. I'll have a go at everything. Now, with some of the stuff I'm doing now, at least I've tried it. And maybe it will suit me, maybe it won't. So as I got older, beyond my 20s, I started to apply that, and I still do. So, have a go.
I'm being a real dag now. What star sign are you?
Cancer.
Oh, see, that's why he's been married for 40 years. And
You should be surprised I even knew that.
An international man of mystery. Of course you knew it.
He's a new age man, like that. There's more to go. But thank you so much.
That was great. That was so insightful.
It really have you. Thank you so much for joining the back fence. And everyone, thank you for listening. And we'll be back in your ears next Monday.
We will be.
Don't forget to follow, rate and review and stars. How many stars?
Out of 5? 5,555 out of 5. Why is the producer laughing?
Can Captain Greg fly that high?
No, wait a minute. Aim high, because Captain Capable Greg's with us.
Exactly.
Aim high.
Ciao. Thanks for listening.
Thank
Bye.
you.